When John Travolta's villain screamed, "Ain't it cool?" while hijacking nuclear weapons, audiences had no idea that a legendary rock guitarist was secretly behind the film's iconic score, or that a critic would reverse his thumbs-up review live on television. A first in film criticism history. From football stars whose roles expanded due to studio love, to the bizarre advice Sandra Bullock gave about humming James Bond themes, and the shocking truth that the movie's title uses completely wrong military terminology, Broken Arrow hides a treasure trove of bizarre behind-the-scenes secrets. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about Broken Arrow. Fact 1. Travolta was originally cast as the hero. When casting began for Broken Arrow in the mid-1990s, the studio had a very different vision for how the movie would look. John Travolta, who was riding high on his career comeback after Pulp Fiction, was originally approached to play Riley Hale, the heroic Air Force captain who would be fighting to stop a nuclear disaster. This was the traditional leading man role, the character audiences would root for throughout the film. But Travolta had other ideas. After reading the script, he told the producers he was far more interested in playing the villain, Major Vic Deakins, the rogue pilot who steals nuclear weapons and holds the government for ransom. This wasn't just a minor preference, it completely changed the dynamic of the entire production. The studio agreed to flip the casting, which meant they needed to find a different actor to play the hero. That's when Slater stepped into the role of Riley Hale. This decision turned out to be crucial for the film's identity because Travolta brought an unexpected energy to the villain role. He decided to play Deakins as larger-than-life, chewing scenery and delivering memorable one-liners with obvious glee. If Travolta had played the straight-laced hero instead, the movie would have had a completely different feel. His charismatic, over-the-top performance as the bad guy became one of the most memorable aspects of Broken Arrow, proving that sometimes actors know better than studios which role will let them shine. The gamble paid off as Travolta earned $7 million for his villain turn and created one of the more entertaining action movie antagonists of the 1990s. Fact 2. The only time Siskel changed his mind on air. Broken Arrow holds a unique place in film criticism history because of something that happened during its review on the television show Siskel and Ebert. When the two famous critics sat down to discuss the movie in February of 1996, Gene Siskel initially gave it a marginal thumbs up, saying he enjoyed the action sequences even though the rest of the film was pretty dumb. But then Roger Ebert delivered his review, giving the movie a thumbs down and pointing out specific problems with the plot, particularly criticizing how the villain constantly talks instead of just pulling the trigger when he has the chance. As Ebert laid out his criticisms, something remarkable happened right there on camera. Siskel paused, thought about what his co-host had just said, and then announced he was changing his mind. He switched his thumbs up to a thumbs down, agreeing that Ebert's points were valid enough to make him reconsider his recommendation. This was the first and only time in the entire run of their show that either critic changed their vote on air after hearing the other's arguments. The moment became legendary among fans of the program because it showed how seriously both men took their craft and how much they respected each other's opinions, even when it meant admitting you might have been wrong. After Siskel changed his vote, he even tried to get Ebert to reverse his positive review of the movie Cop and a Half from 3 years earlier, but Ebert refused with a simple no, making the exchange even more memorable. Fact 3. Football star's role exploded mid-production. Howie Long, the legendary NFL defensive lineman who played 13 years with the Oakland Raiders, was making his film debut in Broken Arrow, playing a character named Kelly, one of the mercenaries working with the villain. In the original script, Long's character was supposed to be killed off about 1/3 of the way through the movie, giving him only a small supporting role. Long himself wasn't even sure he wanted to take the part at first because he didn't care for how minor his character was in the initial version. But something unexpected happened once filming began. The Fox executives started watching the daily footage, which in the film industry is called dailies, and they were impressed with what they saw. Long brought a natural screen presence and physicality to the role that made his scenes more engaging than anyone had anticipated. The studio loved his performance so much that they made a major decision mid-production. They brought in the screenwriter to do rewrites that would eliminate several other characters and expand Kelly's role significantly, keeping him alive through the entire movie instead of killing him off early. This meant Long went from a small part to being one of the main antagonists who appears throughout the film. At 6'5" and 260 pounds, Long was even taller than action stars like Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone. And at 36 years old, he joked that he was hoping to open up a whole new venue for large unemployed actors. The last-minute script changes worked out well for everyone involved, giving the movie a more memorable villain alongside John Travolta's character. Fact 4. Sandra Bullock's bizarre action advice. When Samantha Mathis landed the role of Terry Carmichael, the park ranger who gets caught up in the nuclear weapons crisis, she knew she needed some guidance on how to handle the intense action sequences. Mathis had done dramatic work before, but hadn't really tackled a full-blown action movie with all the running, fighting, and stunt work that Broken Arrow would require. So she reached out to someone who had recent experience in exactly that kind of role, her friend Sandra Bullock. Just 2 years earlier, Bullock had starred in Speed, the high-octane action thriller that made her a household name and showed audiences she could hold her own in explosive action sequences. Mathis figured if anyone could give her practical advice about surviving an action shoot, it would be Bullock. The advice she received was both simple and completely unexpected. Bullock told her that before every single take in an action scene, she should hum the James Bond theme to herself to get into the right mindset. The reasoning was that the iconic spy theme would help create that feeling of confidence and coolness that action heroes need to project on screen. It's a wonderfully odd piece of advice that apparently worked well enough for Bullock in Speed that she felt comfortable passing it along to her friend. Whether Mathis actually followed through and hummed the famous theme before filming her scenes of dodging helicopters, escaping explosions, and fighting bad guys on trains is something only she knows for sure, but it remains one of the more unusual behind-the-scenes tips shared between actors working in the action genre during the 1990s. Fact 5. Rock legend's secret guitar work. The memorable guitar riff that runs through Broken Arrow's soundtrack, particularly in the track known as Rope-a-Dope or Deacon's Theme, wasn't played by just any studio musician. Composer Hans Zimmer brought in Duane Eddy, a legendary guitarist who helped pioneer the twangy rockabilly sound in the late 1950s and early 60s. Eddy was famous for his distinctive baritone guitar style that influenced countless musicians over the decades, but by the mid-1990s, he wasn't typically working on Hollywood film scores. Zimmer had a specific vision for why he wanted Eddy on the project, and it tied back to one of the greatest film composers of all time. In interviews about the score, Zimmer explained that he always thought Ennio Morricone, the Italian maestro behind classic Western like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, would have wanted to work with Duane Eddy if he'd had the chance. So Zimmer decided to just get the real Duane Eddy himself for Broken Arrow. Zimmer described the music as big man music, both in terms of the overall sound and specifically the guitar tone that Eddy brought to the recording sessions. Eddy didn't just play on one track, he was brought in for the entire scoring session, contributing his signature twang throughout the soundtrack. The result was a score that stood out from typical action movie music of the time, blending electronic elements with that classic guitar sound to create something that felt both modern and reminiscent of old Western showdowns. Fact 6. The score became more famous. In other movies, one of the strangest afterlives for any film score happened with Hans Zimmer's music for Broken Arrow. The opening track, known as Rope-a-Dope or Deacon's Theme, featured that distinctive guitar riff that was meant to represent the villain's menacing presence throughout the movie. But something unusual happened after the film's release in 1996. Other filmmakers started using that same piece of music in their own projects, and it ended up becoming more recognizable to audiences from those later films than from Broken Arrow itself. The most notable reuse came in Scream 2, the horror sequel released in 1997, where the theme was repurposed as the character music for Dewey Riley, the well-meaning deputy played by David Arquette. Every time Dewey appeared on screen trying to help solve the mystery or protect the main characters, audiences heard that same driving guitar riff that originally belonged to John Travolta's Nuclear Terrorist. The music was also used in Speed 2 Cruise Control, the ill-fated sequel to the hit action film Speed. Because both Scream 2 and the original Speed were more widely seen and remembered by general audiences than Broken Arrow, many people who heard the theme associated it with those movies instead of its actual source. Film and music fans who recognized the piece from multiple films found it particularly ironic that a villain's theme from a moderately successful action movie ended up being recycled as a hero's theme in a much more popular franchise, creating an unintentional second life for Zimmer's composition. Fact 7. Christian Slater rejected Assassins for this. Christian Slater had a choice to make in the mid-1990s when he was offered a role in Assassins, the action thriller starring Sylvester Stallone and Antonio Banderas that came out in 1995. It was a solid opportunity to work in a big studio action film with major stars, the kind of project that could have been good for his career. But when the offer for Broken Arrow came along at around the same time, Slater made a deliberate decision to turn down Assassins and commit to Broken Arrow instead. His reasoning had nothing to do with the script or the size of the role, or even the paycheck. Slater wanted to work with John Woo, the acclaimed director from Hong Kong, who had built a legendary reputation for his stylized action films before coming to Hollywood. Woo was famous for movies like The Killer and Hard Boiled, which featured his signature style of slow-motion gunfights, elaborate choreography, and themes of loyalty and betrayal. By the time Broken Arrow was being made, Woo had only directed one American film, Hard Target with Jean-Claude Van Damme, so getting the chance to work with him was still considered a special opportunity for actors interested in action cinema. For Slater, the appeal of collaborating with a director known for revolutionizing action filmmaking was worth more than whatever Assassins might have offered. It was a gamble that showed Slater was thinking about working with filmmakers whose artistic vision he respected, rather than just taking whatever high-profile project came his way. Fact 8. The title uses wrong military terminology. The United States military has specific code words for different types of nuclear weapon incidents, and Broken Arrow actually uses the wrong term for what happens in the movie. In official military terminology, a broken arrow refers to an accidental event involving nuclear weapons that doesn't create a risk of nuclear war, such as a weapon being accidentally dropped, damaged, or lost during transport. However, the actual plot of the movie involves the deliberate theft of nuclear weapons by a rogue pilot who plans to use them for extortion, which is a completely different category of incident. The correct military term for the seizure or theft of a functioning nuclear weapon, empty quiver, not broken arrow. The filmmakers either didn't know about this distinction or chose to ignore it, because Broken Arrow simply sounded better as a movie title than Empty Quiver would have. There is a small technical defense for the movie's choice, though. In the plot, the villain makes it initially appear that the nuclear weapons were accidentally jettisoned when the stealth bomber crashed, which would legitimately be a Broken Arrow situation. The military and government officials in the film believe it's an accident at first, so declaring a broken arrow makes sense from their perspective based on the information they have. Only later does it become clear that the weapons were actually stolen, which should have changed the designation to Empty Quiver. So while the movie's title isn't technically accurate for the full story, it does reflect what the characters believe is happening during the early part of the film. Fact 9. Travolta's $7 million villain paycheck. John Travolta's salary for Broken Arrow was $7 million, which was an enormous amount of money for playing a villain in 1996. To put this in perspective, villain roles typically paid much less than hero roles because the bad guy usually had less screen time and wasn't the character that studios built their marketing campaigns around. But Travolta was in a unique position when he signed on for this film. Just 2 years earlier, he had starred in Pulp Fiction, Quentin Tarantino's cultural phenomenon that completely revived his career after it had stalled in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Before Pulp Fiction, Travolta had gone from being one of the biggest stars of the late 70s to struggling to get quality roles. But his performance as Vincent Vega, made him hot property again in Hollywood. And suddenly, he could command top-tier salaries regardless of whether he was playing the hero or the villain. The $7 million paycheck for Broken Arrow demonstrated just how much his market value had increased. Studios were willing to pay leading man money to get Travolta's name on the poster, even if he was playing the antagonist. This was also a reflection of how action movies in the mid-90s were evolving, with some films recognizing that a charismatic villain could be just as much of a draw as the hero. Travolta's star power meant he could essentially write his own ticket, and he used that leverage to take interesting roles like the scenery-chewing Major Deakins, rather than being pigeonholed into traditional leading man parts. Fact 10. 20-minute director's cut lost forever. John Woo's original vision for Broken Arrow was significantly longer and more intense than what audiences saw in theaters. When Woo first assembled his cut of the film, it ran a full 2 hours, which is about 20 minutes longer than the 1 hour and 48-minute theatrical version that was released in February of 1996. According to reports from the production, this longer cut contained substantially more character development that would have given viewers deeper insight into the motivations and relationships between the main characters, particularly the friendship and rivalry between Deakins and Hale. Even more notably, the original version featured considerably more violence in the action sequences, which makes sense given that Woo was famous in Hong Kong for his extremely graphic and stylized action scenes that often pushed boundaries. The studio apparently decided that the film needed to be trimmed down, likely to make it more commercially viable with a tighter runtime, and to secure a more favorable rating from the Motion Picture Association. What makes this particularly frustrating for film fans and Woo enthusiasts is that this longer director's cut has never been officially released in any format. There's no special edition DVD or Blu-ray that includes the extended version, no streaming service that offers both cuts, and no indication that the additional footage even still exists in a form that could be restored and released. For a director whose work is celebrated by action movie fans around the world, having an entire 20 minutes of his vision locked away and possibly lost is a genuine tragedy for cinema preservation. Fact 11. Travolta, the real pilot, played a pilot. John Travolta didn't need much preparation to play an Air Force pilot in Broken Arrow because aviation has been one of his greatest passions in real life for decades. By the time he made this film in 1995, Travolta was already a certified commercial pilot with what's known as a commander's license, which means he was legally qualified to fly commercial jets, not just small private planes. This wasn't just a hobby for him either, as Travolta owned several aircraft of his own and flew them regularly. His collection of planes over the years has included everything from small jets to large commercial aircraft, and he's spoken extensively in interviews about how much he loves flying and how it gives him a sense of freedom and peace. Having this genuine expertise meant that Travolta could bring an authentic understanding to the role of Major Vic Deakins that most actors simply wouldn't have. He knew the terminology, understood the mindset of someone who spends time in a cockpit, and could move through the scenes in the stealth bomber with natural confidence because he actually understood what all the controls and instruments were supposed to do. While the film obviously involved stunt work and special effects for the dangerous sequences, Travolta's real-world aviation knowledge added a layer of credibility to his performance that audiences could sense even if they didn't consciously realize why. It's relatively rare for an actor to play a professional in a field where they actually have legitimate credentials, making this one of those perfect matchups between performer and role. Fact 12. The military boxing scene is completely illegal. The opening sequence of Broken Arrow shows Major Deakins and Captain Hale engaged in a boxing match where they're trading punches without any protective headgear. But this scene actually depicts something that would never be allowed to happen in the real United States Air Force. Military pilots are strictly forbidden from participating in boxing or any other activity that carries a significant risk of head injury, and the regulations around this are taken extremely seriously. The reasoning behind this rule is straightforward and practical. Pilots are responsible for operating incredibly expensive and dangerous equipment, often while carrying weapons or passengers, so the military cannot afford to have them suffer any kind of head trauma that might impair their abilities. Even a relatively minor concussion could ground a pilot and require extensive medical evaluation before they would be cleared to fly again. The regulations specifically state that any loss of consciousness puts a pilot on what's called DNIF status, which stands for Duty Not Including Flying, and they would need to undergo a complete medical review before being allowed back in a cockpit. The fact that Deakins and Hale are shown boxing without even wearing protective headgear makes the scene even more unrealistic, since that increases the likelihood of getting knocked out or suffering a concussion. While the boxing match serves an important narrative purpose in the film by establishing the competitive relationship and physical dynamic between the two characters, anyone with knowledge of actual Air Force protocols would immediately recognize it as pure Hollywood fiction. Fact 13. Slater did nearly all his own stunts. Christian Slater took a hands-on approach to his role as Captain Riley Hale by performing almost all of his own stunts throughout the production of Broken Arrow, which was no small commitment given the intense physical demands of the film. This wasn't a movie with just a few action scenes sprinkled throughout a talky drama. It was packed with dangerous sequences from beginning to end that required real physical skill and bravery. Slater was involved in scenes with massive explosions going off around him, sequences where he had to run and jump while helicopters were firing weapons nearby, extended fight choreography with multiple opponents, and moments where he was dangling from moving vehicles or climbing through collapsing structures. Many actors in his position would have relied heavily on stunt doubles for the more dangerous work, letting the professionals handle anything that looked particularly risky while they stepped in only for close-up shots. But Slater apparently wanted the authenticity of actually being there for as much of the action as possible, which meant he was putting himself in genuinely hazardous situations throughout the shoot. This decision paid off in terms of the final product because audiences could see it was really him in many of the action sequences, which added to the intensity and believability of his performance. It also demonstrated his commitment to the project and his willingness to push himself physically to deliver what the role required, earning respect from both the crew and his co-stars who witnessed the effort he was putting in day after day. Fact 14. Ain't it cool? Became a pop culture catchphrase. There's a specific moment in Broken Arrow where Major Deakins reveals his true intentions to Riley Hale. And when Hale realizes his mentor has completely lost his mind and is actually planning to steal nuclear weapons, he tells Deakins that his mind has taken a walk off the map. Deakins responds with a simple two-word question, asking if his plan isn't cool, delivered with a mixture of pride and menace that perfectly captured John Travolta's over-the-top approach to playing the villain. That brief exchange became one of the most quotable moments from the entire film, with Travolta's delivery making those two words sound both threatening and almost playful at the same time. The line resonated so strongly during test screenings and early marketing efforts that the studio decided to feature it prominently in the theatrical trailers and television commercials for the movie. Audiences who saw the ads heard Travolta asking that question repeatedly, and it became the hook that marketing used to sell the film's tone as a fun, slightly tongue-in-cheek action thriller rather than a deadly serious military drama. The phrase took on a life beyond just the movie itself, becoming a cultural reference point in the mid to late 1990s that people would use when describing something audacious or outrageous. It was the kind of catchphrase that defined Travolta's villain character in just a couple of words, capturing his arrogant confidence and twisted enthusiasm for the chaos he was planning to unleash. Fact 15. Travolta's villain inspired him to play bigger, the theatrical and over-the-top. Performance that John Travolta gave as Major Vic Deakins wasn't something that the director or screenwriter pushed him toward. It was actually Travolta's own creative choice for how he wanted to approach the character. He specifically decided that Deakins should be played as bigger than life, meaning he would chew scenery, deliver lines with extra flair, and generally make the villain as entertaining and memorable as possible, rather than going for a subtle or realistic portrayal. This was a conscious artistic decision that Travolta made because he felt it would make the character more fun to watch and would fit the heightened reality of a John Woo action film. The approach worked brilliantly as Travolta's performance became one of the most talked about aspects of the movie, with critics and audiences either loving or being fascinated by how much he was clearly enjoying himself in the role. What really shows how much Travolta loved playing this character is what he did after filming Wrapped, a set. He kept a leather flight jacket that had his character's B-3 bomber patch prominently stitched on the chest, and he would often wear this jacket in his personal life long after production ended. It wasn't just a costume piece he held onto as a souvenir. It was something he actively chose to wear because he had such fondness for the experience of making the film and inhabiting that character. For an actor of Travolta's stature to remain that connected to a role after the camera stopped rolling shows just how much fun he had embracing his villainous side.